My name is Amber. I'm 28 years old, and for 4 years I sacrificed everything to pay $8,000 annually for my sister Rachel's medical school. At her graduation party, surrounded by her wealthy new friends, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Your job is done. You shouldn't be here." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "You don't know your place, Amber," while everyone laughed. Despite the humiliation burning through me, I smiled politely, placed the expensive gift I'd bought on the table, and walked out with my dignity intact. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I finally taught my ungrateful family that respect isn't optional, it's required. I grew up in Lakewood, a small Midwestern town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Our family wasn't poor by local standards, but we definitely struggled to make ends meet. Mom worked as a receptionist at the local clinic, and Dad ran a small carpentry business that never quite took off. Things were manageable until Dad decided family life wasn't for him and walked out when I was 12 and Rachel was 10. The day he left is seared into my memory. I came home from school to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red and swollen. "Your father's gone," she said flatly. "He's not coming back." No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty closet and a void where a father should have been. Rachel cried for weeks. I didn't have that luxury. Mom, suddenly a single parent with 2 children, took on additional shifts as a waitress at the local diner. She was rarely home, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night, exhausted and short-tempered. Without ever discussing it, I stepped into the role of surrogate parent to Rachel. I made breakfast, packed lunches, helped with homework, and made sure she got to bed on time. The academic contrast between us was evident from the start. Rachel was brilliant. She grasped concepts quickly, retained information effortlessly, and consistently brought home straight A's. I was more practical, decent at math because I needed it for budgeting, adequate in English, but never exceptional. School was something I got through while real life happened around it. Mom's favoritism was blatant and painful. "Rachel is the family's future," she would say, often right in front of me. "She's going to be somebody important one day." When Rachel won the science fair in 7th grade, Mom took a rare day off work to attend. When I was selected for the volleyball team the same year, she simply nodded and said, "That's nice, but don't let it interfere with your chores." By 16, I was working weekends at the local grocery store while still managing the household. My first paycheck went toward new glasses for Rachel, who had broken hers during gym class. Mom praised Rachel for being so careful with the new pair, but never acknowledged my contribution. After graduating high school, I immediately went to full-time work at Wilson's department store while Rachel continued to excel academically. I had always dreamed of becoming an interior designer. I had notebooks filled with room layouts and color schemes, but those dreams seemed increasingly distant as family responsibilities mounted. "That's a hobby, Amber, not a career," Mom dismissed when I mentioned design school. "Besides, we need to save for Rachel's college." At 19, I moved into my first apartment, a tiny one-bedroom with second-hand furniture and thin walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Still, I sent money home regularly, knowing that Rachel's future education would require every penny our family could scrape together. When Rachel graduated high school as valedictorian, the entire extended family attended the ceremony. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone came to celebrate her achievement. I stood in the background, taking photos and feeling strangely disconnected from the celebration. This was Rachel's moment. Everyone reminded me, as if I might somehow try to claim a piece of it for myself. "Isn't she amazing?" my Aunt Margaret gushed, not really expecting an answer from me. "A natural genius. She gets that from your mother's side." At the graduation dinner, which I helped pay for with my employee discount at the restaurant, Rachel was showered with gifts and praise. When she opened my present, a leather-bound journal for medical notes that had cost me a week's salary, She barely glanced at it before moving on to the next, larger package from our grandparents. "Thanks," she said absently, already tearing into the next gift. That night, as I drove back to my apartment alone, I told myself that this was how things were supposed to be. Rachel was special. She deserved the spotlight. My role was to support from the wings, and I had made peace with that. Or so I believed. Rachel was accepted to Westfield University, a prestigious school known for its pre-med program. She received a partial academic scholarship that covered about 60% of her tuition. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, Mom had called everyone we knew to share the news. "My daughter, the future doctor," she announced proudly at every opportunity. The family celebration coincided with my promotion to department supervisor at Wilson's. I mentioned my news as we gathered around Rachel. "That's nice," dear Mom said, barely glancing my way. "Rachel, tell everyone about your scholarship again." Despite the obvious favoritism, I contributed to Rachel's undergraduate expenses. Books, housing supplements, meal plans. The scholarship didn't cover everything, and student loans only stretched so far. Mom worked overtime but still couldn't manage it all. Without discussion, I filled the gaps. During this time, I started taking night classes at Lakewood Community College, studying business management. It was practical, something that could help me advance at work rather than pursue my design dreams. "Why waste money on classes?" Mom questioned when I mentioned my first semester grades. "It's not like you're at a real university like your sister." Rachel's visits home became increasingly rare and, when they did occur, increasingly uncomfortable. She spoke about professors and theories that went over our heads, using medical terminology like common language. "You wouldn't understand," became her frequent refrain when I asked questions. By her junior year, Rachel had adopted a slightly different accent, something vaguely East Coast, that she'd never had growing up in Lakewood. She dressed differently too, expensive brands I recognized from the department store, but could never afford myself. Meanwhile, I was promoted to assistant manager at Wilson's. The pay increase was substantial enough that I could finally replace my 10-year-old car that broke down weekly. Instead, I put the money into a separate account labeled Rachel's Future. When Rachel announced her acceptance to Westfield's medical school, Mom actually cried with joy. I felt proud too, genuinely happy for my sister's achievement. Then came the family financial meeting. "Even with loans, there's still an $8,000 gap per year," Rachel explained, spreadsheets laid out on Mom's kitchen table. "I've applied for additional grants, but they're highly competitive." Mom looked worried for the first time. "I can maybe manage $3,000 if I pick up weekend shifts," she calculated. Before anyone could ask, I heard myself say, "I'll cover the $8,000. "All of it?" Rachel's face lit up. "Really? Oh my God, Amber, that would be amazing." Mom looked relieved but not surprised, as if she'd expected this all along. "That's very generous of you, Amber." To make good on my promise, I took a second job bartending at nights and on weekends. My schedule became a relentless cycle of work, brief sleep, and more work. Vacations became an impossible luxury. I downgraded to an even smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood to save on rent. My 10-year-old car became 12, then 14 years old, held together with hope and cheap repairs. During those 4 years of medical school, Rachel's calls became increasingly rare and almost exclusively focused on money. "Tuition is due next week," or "I need an extra $500 for a special seminar." There was never "How are you?" or "Thank you for working 60 hours a week so I can follow my dreams." My resentment grew, but so did my determination to see this through. I had invested too much to back out now. Besides, I told myself, once Rachel was a successful doctor, things would change. She would remember my sacrifices. She would help me achieve my own dreams. Rachel's social media told a different story than her financial pleas. Photos showed her at upscale restaurants with classmates, weekend trips to nearby cities, and brand-name clothing that contradicted her claims of living frugally. When I gently mentioned these discrepancies, she became defensive. Medical school is stressful. We need these breaks to maintain our mental health. You wouldn't understand the pressure. My friend Kelly, a nurse who worked at the hospital where I had my second job, expressed concern about the arrangement. She's using you, Amber, Kelly said one night after my shift. I know plenty of med students. They struggle, but they don't have their siblings working themselves to death. Marcus, the security guard at Wilson's who had become a good friend, agreed. You look exhausted all the time. When was the last time you did something for yourself? I couldn't remember. My health began to suffer. Persistent headaches, weight loss from skipped meals, and a constant state of exhaustion became my new normal. During a rare phone call, I mentioned to Rachel that I might need to see a doctor myself. You should take better care of yourself, she replied dismissively. Anyway, I need an extra $1,000 for a specialized stethoscope. All the top students have one. I transferred the money that night, postponing my own medical visit for another month. The pattern continued for 4 long years. Every time I considered reducing my support, guilt overwhelmed me. Mom's constant refrain echoed in my mind. Rachel is the family's future. If I stepped back now, I would be responsible for derailing that future. The sacrifices were worth it, I told myself. Soon Rachel would graduate, start her residency, and begin her real career. Things would get better. They had to. After 4 years of sacrifice, Rachel's graduation day finally arrived. Despite my tight budget, I splurged on a new outfit, a navy blue dress from Wilson's with my employee discount, and a pair of modest heels. I wanted to look professional and put together among the families of Rachel's classmates, many of whom I knew were wealthy from her occasional stories. I spent weeks selecting the perfect graduation gift, finally settling on an expensive medical watch that could track pulse rates and had antimicrobial bands, practical for a doctor but also elegant. It cost nearly a month's rent, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. I had it engraved with her initials and a simple message, "Proud of you. Love, Amber." The 3-hour drive to Westfield University gave me time to rehearse what I would say when I saw Rachel. I wanted to express my pride without sounding possessive of her achievement. This was her day, after all. When I arrived at Rachel's apartment, the greeting was far cooler than I had anticipated. "Oh, you're early," she said, checking her expensive watch. "I'm still getting ready. Mom's flight gets in soon, so I need to leave for the airport in 20 minutes. No hug. No, it's good to see you. Just logistics." "I can drive you," I offered. "No need. I'm going with friends. You can get settled at the hotel and we'll see you at the ceremony." Before I could respond, her phone rang. "Hi, Jessica." "Yes, I'm almost ready." "No, it's just my sister." She walked into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. "Just my sister." The words stung more than they should have. Later, at the pre-ceremony gathering, Rachel introduced me to her friends with minimal enthusiasm. "This is Amber, my sister from back home." Back home, as if Lakewood was some distant planet rather than the place she'd lived for 18 years. "Oh, you're the one who works at a department store, right?" one friend asked, her tone suggesting she was speaking to a particularly slow child. "I'm the assistant manager." "Yes," I replied, maintaining my dignity. "That's nice," another responded with a tight smile before turning back to Rachel. "So anyway, about the residency interviews." I was effectively dismissed from the conversation. The ceremony itself was beautiful, held in the university's grand auditorium with ornate moldings and stained glass windows. I wasn't seated with family. That section was reserved for parents only, I was told. Instead, I sat several rows back, watching as Mom beamed proudly from the family section, dabbing occasional tears. When Rachel crossed the stage to receive her diploma, I felt a surge of genuine pride. Despite everything, my sister had achieved something remarkable, and I had helped make it possible. The post-graduation party was held at Montrose, an upscale restaurant where the cheapest entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. Rachel's classmates arrived with their families, doctors, lawyers, executives, all congratulating each other as if their children's accomplishments were extensions of their own success. I sat at a table near the back, making polite conversation with the grandmother of one of Rachel's classmates. Mom was seated at the main table with Rachel and her closest friends, laughing and fitting in perfectly despite having looked down on pretentious people throughout our childhood. When the time came for gifts, I approached Rachel with my carefully wrapped package, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my choice. Would it be enough among what were surely extravagant presents from wealthy families? Here, I said, handing her the box. I hope it's useful. Rachel opened it with several people watching. Her expression flickered between surprise and something else. Embarrassment? A medical watch, she said flatly. It tracks pulse rates and has antimicrobial bands, I explained, feeling increasingly awkward. I thought it might be practical for rounds. Thanks, she said, quickly closing the box and setting it aside. Kind of old school, but thanks. One of her friends leaned over. My parents got me the new digital version that syncs with patient charts. Super convenient. As the friend showed off her clearly superior gift, Rachel gave me a look I'll never forget. Part pity, part annoyance, as if my gift had somehow highlighted her humble origins in front of her sophisticated new circle. Then came the moment that would replay in my mind for months afterward. As people began to mingle again, I approached Rachel to ask about her plans for the evening, wondering if we might have a few minutes alone to catch up. She turned to me, lowering her voice, but not enough that others couldn't hear. Look, Amber, I appreciate you coming, but your job is done. You shouldn't be here. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. What? This is the beginning of my professional life, she continued. These connections are important for my career. I don't need. She gestured vaguely at me, reminders of where I came from right now. Mom, who had approached during this exchange, nodded in agreement. You don't know your place, Amber, she said with a light laugh, as if sharing an inside joke with Rachel. Always trying to insert yourself. Several of Rachel's friends nearby chuckled, some looking embarrassed for me, others simply amused at my expense. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. I wasn't family. I was an ATM that had served its purpose. A background character whose role in the story had concluded. I could have created a scene. I could have reminded them of every sacrifice, every double shift, every bill I'd paid. Instead, I smiled politely, placed the car keys I had planned to give Rachel as a surprise second gift on the table beside the watch, and said, "You're right. Congratulations, Dr. Williams. Best of luck with your career." Then I walked out, head held high despite the burning in my eyes and the vice grip of humiliation around my chest. In my car, the 14-year-old Honda I'd kept running because a new car meant less money for Rachel's education, I finally allowed myself to cry. Huge, racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. For years of sacrifice. $32,000. Countless missed opportunities and delayed dreams. All for someone who was embarrassed to acknowledge me in front of her new friends. The 3-hour drive home was the longest of my life. Every mile marker seemed to ask the same question: how had I not seen this coming? For the first week after graduation, I ignored all calls from my family. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom demanding to know why I was being so dramatic and from Rachel expressing annoyance that I had overreacted to a simple comment. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts at both jobs despite my exhaustion. Physical fatigue was preferable to the mental space for thinking about what had happened. Kelly came over on Friday night with takeout and wine, sitting cross-legged on my shabby couch as I finally let the full story pour out. "I knew she was using you," Kelly said, refilling my glass, "but this is next-level entitlement. Your sister is a narcissist, Amber. And your mom enabled it your entire lives. Maybe I misunderstood, I said weakly, still trying to rationalize their behavior. Kelly fixed me with a stern look. You didn't misunderstand, your job is done. That's pretty damn clear. As the days passed, my hurt slowly transformed into anger. I began to see patterns that had been invisible to me before, blinded as I was by family loyalty and the role I'd been assigned. Rachel's text messages grew increasingly impatient. You need to get over this. I have my residency interview next week and I don't need this stress. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just more demands for emotional support. Mom's calls evolved from confused to outright manipulative. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By ruining Rachel's big moment with your jealousy. Everything they'd done for me? I struggled to identify a single sacrifice either had made on my behalf. 2 weeks after graduation, Mom called with an invitation that left me speechless. We're having a family dinner Sunday to discuss Rachel's residency options. Be at my house at 6 and please bring that pasta salad everyone likes. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't been publicly humiliated and dismissed after years of financial support. As if my only value was still in what I could provide, whether money or pasta salad. I can't make it, I said simply. What do you mean you can't make it? This is important, Amber. Rachel needs our support during this transition. I'm sorry, but I have plans. For the first time in my adult life, I hung up on my mother. That evening, I pulled out an old journal and began cataloging my sacrifices over the years. $8,000 annually for 4 years of medical school. Additional money for emergencies that somehow coincided with spring break trips posted on social media. Countless hours of childcare during our youth. Delayed education. Postponed dreams. A career in retail rather than design because one paid better immediately and the other required time for school. In a box under my bed, I found old photos and birthday cards. Rachel at 16, beaming as she unwrapped the graphing calculator I'd bought by working double shifts. Thanks, sis. I'll totally pay you back when I'm rich, she had written inside the thank you note. Mom, opening the refurbished laptop I'd purchased when her old one died, right before Rachel's college applications were due. This will be so helpful for Rachel's essays, she had said, barely acknowledging it was meant for her. I made an appointment with a therapist, something I'd never considered before, viewing it as an unnecessary expense. Dr. Winters listened patiently to my story during our first session, then said something that struck me like lightning. You've been both enabler and victim in this dynamic. Your mother trained you from childhood to prioritize Rachel's needs above your own, and you internalized that message so completely that you continued the pattern into adulthood without question. But that's what family does, I protested. They support each other. Support is reciprocal, Dr. Winters corrected gently. What you've described is exploitation. That word, exploitation, followed me home and lingered in my mind for days. Had I really been exploited by my own family? The thought was too painful to accept immediately. Marcus, who had been checking in on me regularly since graduation, offered a perspective I hadn't considered. If a friend treated you this way, would you still be friends with them? He asked during our lunch break. The answer was obvious. I would have cut ties long ago. Then why accept it from family? He continued. Biology isn't a free pass for abuse. A week later, while organizing my financial documents for tax season, I discovered something that turned my simmering anger into full-blown rage. Among Rachel's tuition statements was a notice of a grant she had received in her second year, a $15,000 award that she had never mentioned. If she had received this grant, why had she still needed my $8,000 that year? And where had that money gone? With a growing sense of betrayal, I began investigating more thoroughly. Rachel's social media provided the answers. During spring breaks when she claimed to be doing intensive study programs, there were photos of her in Cancun, Miami, and once even Paris, carefully untagged but visible in her friends' photos where she was mentioned in comments. While I was working 60-hour weeks in Lakewood, Rachel was enjoying European vacations with the money I had sacrificed to provide. I made an appointment with a financial advisor to assess the damage to my own future. The numbers were sobering. If I had invested the $32,000 I gave Rachel over 4 years, plus the additional emergency funds that probably totaled another $10,000, I would have had a substantial start on retirement savings or a down payment on a home. Instead, I had a 14-year-old car and an apartment with a leaking ceiling. You've been quite generous, the advisor said diplomatically. Perhaps too generous, given your income level. That night, I drafted an email to Rachel but didn't send it. The words were too raw, too angry. Instead, I wrote everything in my journal, allowing myself to express the full range of my feelings without filter. By morning, a plan had begun to form. If Rachel and Mom wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then perhaps it was time to approach our relationship with the same cold calculation they had applied to me. I would no longer be the family doormat. I would no longer sacrifice my needs for people who viewed me as nothing more than a resource. And I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, both financially and emotionally. The confrontation was inevitable. I just needed to be prepared when it came. The confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after graduation, I returned home from work to find Rachel and Mom waiting outside my apartment building. Rachel looked annoyed, tapping her foot impatiently. Mom looked determined, her mouth set in a tight line I recognized from childhood arguments. Finally, Rachel said as I approached, "We've been waiting for 30 minutes. No hello. No apology for showing up unannounced. Just irritation that I hadn't been available on their schedule." "I was at work," I replied simply, unlocking the building door without inviting them in. They followed anyway. Once inside my small apartment, Rachel looked around with poorly disguised disdain. "You still haven't upgraded? This place is depressing." "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, remaining standing rather than offering them seats. Mom answered for her. "Rachel got accepted to the residency program at Memorial. It's incredibly prestigious, but the housing in that area is very expensive. We need to discuss the financial arrangements." I stared at them, waiting for more. Surely this wasn't why they had come. Surely they weren't actually asking for. "I'll need about $1,200 a month for the difference in rent," Rachel continued, pulling out her phone calculator. "Plus probably a few hundred for utilities and professional wardrobe expenses. The stipend they provide is insulting considering the cost of living there." They were serious. After everything that had happened at graduation, they were here to ask for more money. "No," I said quietly. Mom looked up sharply. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. I will not be giving Rachel any more money." Rachel laughed nervously. "Don't be ridiculous, Amber. This is my career we're talking about. My future." "And what about my future?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded despite the rage building inside me. "Oh, please," Rachel rolled her eyes. "It's not like you have big career aspirations. You work in retail." "I work in retail because every spare dollar I had went to your education," I replied. "I work in retail because I didn't have time to pursue my own degree while working 2 jobs to fund yours." Mom stepped in, using the conciliatory tone she always employed when trying to manipulate me. "Amber, honey, we understand you're feeling a little underappreciated. But this is family. We support each other. Let's continue this conversation somewhere else," I suggested, grabbing my purse. "I need coffee." 10 minutes later, we sat in the corner of a nearby cafe, far enough from other customers that our conversation wouldn't be overheard. I took a deep breath and began the speech I had been mentally composing for weeks. "For the past 4 years, I've given you $8,000 annually for medical school. That's $32,000 total. I've also provided additional funds for emergencies that, by my calculation, total another $9,600. I placed a folder on the table between us. In this folder are screenshots of social media posts showing Rachel on vacations in Cancun, Miami, and Paris during times she claimed to need extra money for study materials or emergency expenses. There's also documentation of a $15,000 grant she received in her second year that she never disclosed, despite continuing to accept my $8,000. Rachel's face paled. Mom looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Mom asked, looking to Rachel for explanation. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Those trips were very cheap package deals. Everyone needs breaks during med school. The stress is incredible. And the grant. I pressed. That barely covered my living expenses, she muttered, not meeting my eyes. While you were enjoying European vacations, I continued steadily. I was working 60-hour weeks. I lived in an apartment with black mold because it was the cheapest option. I drove a car that broke down weekly because I couldn't afford repairs, let alone a replacement. I postponed medical care for myself because your education took priority. Mom tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. At your graduation, you told me my job was done and that I shouldn't be there. Mom, you said I didn't know my place. You both made it abundantly clear that I was not family but an ATM that had served its purpose. You're being dramatic, Rachel scoffed, but her voice lacked conviction. No, I'm being accurate. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing our relationship clearly. And now that I do, I'm setting new terms. I pulled out a document I had prepared with the help of a lawyer friend of Kelly's. This is a repayment agreement for the $41,600 you've received from me. It includes a reasonable interest rate and a monthly payment plan extending over 5 years. Rachel's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. This is absurd. Mom exclaimed. You don't charge family interest on help freely given. It wasn't freely given, I corrected. It was taken under false pretenses. Rachel misrepresented her financial situation, concealed additional funding sources, and used my money for luxury expenses while I struggled to survive. Rachel's demeanor suddenly shifted from entitled to pleading. Amber, please. I can't afford these payments during residency. My stipend barely covers necessities. Yet you were planning to ask me for another $1,000+ per month, I pointed out. Find the money the same way you would have if I had agreed to your latest demands. This will destroy our family, Mom said, her voice low and threatening. Our family was destroyed the moment you both decided I was nothing more than Rachel's financial backup plan. The moment you laughed at my expense in front of her friends. The moment you made it clear that my years of sacrifice meant nothing to either of you. So that's it? Rachel asked, tears now forming in her eyes. You're choosing money over family? No, Rachel. I'm choosing self-respect over exploitation. I'm choosing my future over yours, for once in my life. Mom stood up abruptly. I didn't raise you to be this selfish. I looked at her calmly. You didn't raise me at all, Mom. You were too busy working and then too focused on Rachel. I raised myself and then I helped raise Rachel too. Come on, Mom, Rachel said, grabbing her purse. She's clearly made up her mind. Let's go. As they walked away, Rachel turned back briefly. You'll regret this, Amber. When you need family someday, remember this moment. I already regret the past 15 years, I called after her. But I won't regret today. As soon as they left, my phone exploded with texts and calls from extended family. Aunt Margaret was deeply disappointed in my jealous attitude. Uncle Robert wanted to know why I was punishing Rachel for her success. Cousins I barely spoke to suddenly had strong opinions about my obligation to family. I turned off my phone completely, experiencing a moment of pure silence that felt like freedom for the first time in years. That evening, Kelly came over with a bottle of champagne. To standing up for yourself, she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. For the first time since graduation, I slept through the night without waking to anxiety or regret. Whatever came next, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The aftermath of my confrontation with Rachel and Mom brought a barrage of attempts to regain control over me. The flying monkeys descended first, relatives I rarely heard from suddenly calling with guilt-laden messages. "Your mother is devastated," Aunt Margaret reported. "She raised you better than this." Rachel might lose her residency position if she can't afford housing near the hospital, Uncle Robert claimed, though I knew this was an exaggeration. I maintained the same response to each. "This is between Rachel, Mom, and me. I appreciate your concern, but my decision is final." After 2 weeks of this approach yielding no results, the tactics changed. Mom left tearful voicemails about family loyalty. Rachel sent long emails detailing the hardships of residency and how my vindictiveness was adding unnecessary stress during a critical time in her career. I saved the emails but didn't respond. Dr. Winters had helped me understand that engaging would only extend the drama. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding my life brick by brick. I enrolled in additional courses at Lakewood Community College, determined to finish my business degree. The registration fee took most of my savings, but for once, I was investing in myself. I opened a small savings account with just $50, labeled Interior Design Future. Each week, I added whatever I could spare, even if it was only $5 or $10. Watching the balance grow, however slowly, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. At Wilson's department store, I began setting boundaries with demanding customers, no longer feeling compelled to sacrifice my dignity for others' convenience. When Mrs. Harrington insisted I stay an hour after closing to help her select curtains, I politely but firmly declined. Our designers would be happy to schedule a consultation during regular business hours, I told her, surprised at how natural it felt to prioritize my time. 3 months after the confrontation, I was offered a promotion to store manager when my supervisor retired. The salary increase was substantial, nearly 30% more than I was currently making. For the first time, I felt financially secure enough to quit my second job at the bar. "You deserve this," Marcus told me over coffee to celebrate my promotion. "You've always been the hardest worker there." With 1 job instead of 2, I suddenly had evenings and weekends free. The newfound time felt almost uncomfortable at first. I'd grown so accustomed to constant work that leisure seemed foreign. Rachel's financial struggles without my support became evident through Mom's occasional updates, which always carried an undercurrent of accusation. Rachel had to take a second job doing telemedicine consultations on weekends, she reported. "She's exhausted, but that's what happens when family turns their back on you." I let the guilt trip slide off me like rain on a window. "I'm sorry to hear she's struggling," I replied neutrally. "Lots of residents work multiple jobs. It's unfortunately common in the medical field." Mom's financial demands increased as Rachel's support decreased. Suddenly there were emergency home repairs and unexpected medical bills. I offered emotional support but stood firm on financial boundaries. "I can help you research assistance programs," I offered when Mom complained about prescription costs. "But I'm not in a position to provide monetary help right now." "You have a manager's salary now," she countered. "Don't pretend you can't afford to help your mother." "I'm focusing on becoming financially stable," I explained. Something I should have done years ago. New friendships began to form as I participated in community college study groups and joined a local book club. I discovered that without the constant pressure of supporting Rachel, I was more relaxed, funnier, and more engaging. People seemed drawn to this new version of me. After months of friendly lunches and coffee breaks, Marcus finally asked me to dinner, a real date after years of focusing solely on work and family obligations. "I've wanted to ask you out for at least 2 years, he admitted across the table at Martinelli's, Lakewood's nicest restaurant. "But you were always so stressed and busy." For the first time in my adult life, I experienced the simple joy of being prioritized by someone else. Marcus listened when I spoke. He remembered details about my interests. He respected my boundaries without question. 6 months after graduation, Rachel showed up unexpectedly at Wilson's during my shift. She looked thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that her expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. "We need to talk," she announced, approaching the counter where I was helping a customer. "I'm working," I replied calmly. "I can meet you after my shift ends at 6. "This can't wait," she insisted, raising her voice slightly. "This is family business." I excused myself from the customer and led Rachel to a quiet corner. "Either speak to me respectfully in a low voice or leave. Those are your options." Rachel's eyes widened at my firmness, so different from my previous acquiescence. "The payment plan you created is impossible," she hissed. "I can barely afford rent and food." "Then propose an alternative," I suggested. "I'm willing to be flexible on the timeline, but not on the total amount." "This is ridiculous. You're my sister." "Yes, and as my sister, you should want to make things right." The conversation devolved quickly, with Rachel's voice rising despite my warnings. Customers began to stare. When she knocked over a display in frustration, I had no choice but to call security. Marcus arrived quickly, standing between us with professional detachment. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave the premises." "Do you know who I am?" Rachel demanded. "I'm a doctor. A resident physician." "I don't care if you're the Surgeon General," Marcus replied evenly. "You're creating a disturbance in a private business." As Marcus escorted her out, Rachel shouted back at me, "This isn't over, Amber. Mom is right. You've changed, and not for the better." The incident shook me more than I wanted to admit. That evening, I consulted with Kelly's lawyer friend about harassment concerns. A cease and desist letter might be appropriate, she advised. It establishes a paper trail if things escalate. The formal letter was delivered to both Rachel and Mom the following week. Its effect was immediate and unexpected. Complete silence. No calls, no texts, no emails. No flying monkeys bearing guilt trips. At first, the silence was unnerving. Then, gradually, it became peaceful. I could focus entirely on rebuilding without the constant emotional drain of family drama. I used the time productively. I finished my business degree. I started taking interior design night classes at the community college, just one course per semester, but it was a start. Through a friend of Kelly's, I got my first small client project, redesigning a home office for a local real estate agent. "You have a real eye for this," the client said when I presented my concept boards. "The way you balance function and aesthetics is impressive." Her words validated the dream I had deferred for so long. 8 months after our confrontation at the cafe, I received an unexpected email from Rachel. The tone was noticeably different from her previous communications. "Amber, I've been doing a lot of thinking during these past months. Residency has been harder than I expected, and not just financially. I've been humbled in ways I never anticipated. I'm not ready to have a full conversation yet, but I wanted to acknowledge that I understand why you did what you did. Things can't go back to how they were before, but maybe someday we can find a new way forward. Rachel." No demands. No guilt trips. Just a simple acknowledgement that perhaps she had begun to see things differently. I didn't rush to respond. After years of jumping whenever Rachel or Mom called, I gave myself permission to process at my own pace. Whatever came next would happen on my terms, not theirs. 2 years passed, bringing changes I could never have imagined that day I walked out of Rachel's graduation party. My interior design business, initially just a side project, had grown enough that I reduced my hours at Wilson's to part-time. I had a steady client base, mostly through word-of-mouth referrals, and a small but growing reputation for affordable yet stylish designs. My relationship with Marcus developed into something solid and nurturing. Unlike my family, he celebrated my successes without feeling threatened by them. When I landed my first major commercial project, redesigning the waiting area of a local medical practice, he brought champagne and took me to dinner. "I'm so proud of you," he said, words I had rarely heard growing up. I moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, decorating it exactly as I wanted, a showcase of my design aesthetic that also served as a portfolio for potential clients. My 14-year-old car was finally replaced with a reliable used model that didn't break down monthly. Throughout this time, communication with my family remained minimal. Rachel sent occasional brief emails, updates about her residency neutral in tone. Mom called on holidays but kept conversations superficial. I maintained polite distance, protecting the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Rachel called. "Can we meet? I'm in town for a conference and have some time tomorrow." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and her hotel. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner where we could talk privately. When Rachel walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, somewhat artificial persona she had cultivated in medical school. She looked more like the sister I remembered from childhood, her hair in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a sweater rather than the designer clothes she once favored. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting down with her coffee. "Of course," I replied, unsure what to expect. Rachel took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not the half-hearted attempts I've made in emails." She looked directly at me. "I was entitled, selfish, and ungrateful. I used you financially and emotionally for years, then discarded you when it was convenient." What I said at graduation was unforgivable. I sat in stunned silence, having never expected such direct acknowledgement. "Residency has been eye-opening," she continued. "I work with people from all backgrounds, many who struggled financially through medical school without family support. I've seen real sacrifice and gratitude. It made me realize how warped my perspective was." "What about the repayment plan?" I asked cautiously. "I've been making the payments, though I know I missed a few months at the beginning. I intend to honor the agreement fully." She hesitated. "But I want you to know it's not about the money. I understand now that what I took from you wasn't just financial. It was years of your life, your dreams, your self-worth." For the first time since childhood, I saw genuine emotion in Rachel's eyes. No manipulation, no calculation, just sincere regret. "What changed?" I asked. "Many things. Working with patients who have nothing yet show immense gratitude for small kindnesses. Watching other residents maintain close, supportive relationships with siblings who had far less to give than you did. But mostly," she paused, "I treated a patient who reminded me of you. She had sacrificed everything for her brother's education, worked multiple jobs, postponed her own dreams." Listening to her story was like looking in a mirror and seeing our relationship from your perspective for the first time. We talked for over 2 hours, covering ground we had never explored before. Rachel acknowledged Mom's role in creating our unhealthy dynamic. "Mom still doesn't get it," Rachel admitted. "She believes I'm humoring you by apologizing. She thinks once I'm an attending physician with a real salary, things will go back to how they were, with you in a supporting role and me as the family star." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think Mom is wrong about a lot of things. I think she did both of us a disservice by creating this hierarchy between us. And I think whatever relationship we rebuild needs to be equal and respectful, or it's not worth having." We didn't resolve everything in one conversation. Decades of unhealthy patterns couldn't be fixed in an afternoon. But it was a beginning based on truth rather than obligation or exploitation. Over the following months, Rachel and I established a new, more balanced relationship. We talked on the phone every few weeks, sharing genuine updates about our lives. When she completed her residency and accepted a position at a rural hospital, choosing service over prestige in a way the old Rachel never would have, I attended the small celebration, feeling proud of her growth. Mom's evolution came more slowly and with greater resistance. When my interior design business was featured in a local magazine, she finally showed a grudging respect for my career path. "I suppose there is good money in decorating rich people's homes," she conceded during a phone call. It's not about rich people, Mom, I corrected. I work with clients of all income levels. It's about creating spaces where people feel comfortable and inspired. Well, the article made you sound quite professional, she allowed, which from Mom was practically effusive praise. The Thanksgiving after Rachel completed her residency marked a turning point. We gathered at my apartment, Mom, Rachel, Marcus, and me. The dynamic was noticeably different from family gatherings of the past. When Mom began to fall into old patterns, commenting that Rachel's medical career was such an achievement compared to just decorating, Rachel herself stepped in. Actually, Mom, Amber's business requires incredible creativity and technical knowledge. She's running a successful company while I'm essentially an employee at my hospital. We've just chosen different paths. Mom looked startled, then contemplative, and used to Rachel challenging the established narrative. Later that evening, as Rachel helped me wash dishes, she spoke quietly. I've been making double payments on our agreement. I should be able to complete it by next year. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. I've been thinking, she continued, once the financial debt is cleared, I'd like to address the other debts between us, the emotional ones. Those are harder to quantify, but equally important. What did you have in mind? I asked. I'm not sure yet, but I want you to know I'm committed to making things right, not just with money but with actions. You deserved better from me and from Mom. My healing journey continued, with therapy helping me understand the generational patterns in our family. Mom's own childhood had been marked by similar favoritism, creating a cycle she repeated without awareness. Breaking that cycle became important to me, especially as Marcus and I began discussing our future together. I want any children we might have to know their worth isn't measured by academic achievement or career prestige, I told him one evening. I want them to know they're valued simply for who they are. They will, he promised. We'll make sure of it. As my business grew and my personal life flourished, I reflected often on the lessons of the past few years. I had learned that true family supports each other reciprocally, not transactionally. I had discovered my own worth beyond what I could provide to others. And I had found the courage to demand respect even when it meant facing rejection or criticism. The journey wasn't easy or straightforward. There were still difficult moments with Mom, still occasional tensions with Rachel as we navigated our new relationship. But the foundation had shifted from exploitation to mutual respect, and that made all the difference. To those of you watching who might recognize your own family dynamics in my story, remember that your value isn't determined by what you provide to others. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for healthy relationships. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to break unhealthy patterns, even when it's painful. Have you ever had to stand up to family for your own well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family challenges. And remember, sharing these videos helps others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own.